Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Buckeye Blueprint. Just a two-man edition this week. I'm Colin Hostel, the Assistant Sports Director at Lantern TV, and I'm here with Nick McWilliams, the sports editor at the Lantern. You can go yell at Jacob for not wearing the right clothing. So we're going to talk a little bit about men's basketball, then talk about wrestling for the first time on a Buckeye Blueprint. We're coming off a week where Ohio State actually has strung together 2 wins in a row. They're both a little bit close, a little bit shaky. But they are wins nonetheless. They won at Michigan and then versus Rutgers 70-64. So could you take anything away from that other than the fact that they actually came away with W's?
Well, I think this is the first time since December of last year that they actually managed to string together 2 wins in the same stretch. And it's just kind of incredible how much they struggled with Rutgers. Rutgers on paper was the much worse team, I guess you could say. I kind of expected Ohio State not to have as much problem with them as they did. But, they had big performances out of Cam Williams and Trevor Thompson, who they both ended up being instrumental in the win. I don't know how much you really want to take away from this for the team. They have a big 2-game road series here coming up against Maryland and Michigan State. And, right now, if Ohio State wants to match its win total in conference from what it had last year, they have to win out all 6 games. And one of these 2 games, whether it's Maryland or Michigan State, I'm leaning towards Maryland, of course. One of them is most likely going to be a loss for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, one of them, as if they're most likely not. They're both not likely to lose both, which it seems like they likely are.
We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see. We also pronounced them dead prior to the Michigan game, and then this happened.
True.
So this seems like it's going to be a path where we're really going to find out, does Ohio State have any chance of making any sort of noise in the Big Ten tournament? Or have these wins sort of been like, they won a game here and there. They did upset Michigan. They won some, but in the end, this is not an awesome Ohio State team. In fact, it's one of the more poor ones in recent memory.
Yeah, maybe they could make some noise in the Big Ten tournament. Maybe somehow, some way, they'll find a way to actually advance somewhat deeper into the tournament than past the first day. I really don't have a lot of faith in this team from what I've watched from them. They beat Rutgers. I'll give them that. They ended up getting away with the win. That's fine. And they've got 2 wins in a row now. But, just overall watching this team, I don't think there's a whole bunch there to keep going off of. They've got 6 games left in the season, and then they'll go to the Big Ten tournament. And then right now, as it stands, they would be hard-pressed to get an NIT invitation, really.
Yep.
And it's not like they're going to the NCAA tournament, obviously.
It'd be a heck of an upset there in the Big Ten tournament.
Exactly. So, right now, this team, I think, is playing a lot more for pride than it is for any kind of position to end the season on. So.
All right. So I think we can wrap up our men's basketball thoughts there. It's relatively depressing. And last week, we went into a less depressing portion where we talked about the women's basketball team. But they're not doing much lately. They have Maryland in about 2 weeks. But until then, they're not playing much. So we're going to talk a little wrestling. This is the first time that we've talked wrestling yet. The wrestling team, they're very good. They're highly ranked. They have a few guys who are ranked number 1 in their weight class. But they have lost they've lost 2 of their last 3.
Right.
And they're going to face Nebraska, who's the number 5 ranked team in the nation. What do you see from them that they need to do to improve? Because against Iowa and Penn State, those are 2 great teams, and they really seem to struggle against them in the big moments.
Ohio State has a great top of its lineup and bottom of its lineup. You have Nathan Tomasello and Kyle Snyder. Bo Jordan. And Miles Martin, and even Jose Rodriguez, even as a freshman. Colin Moore. But then in the middle, you kind of get lost. I can't forget about Micah Jordan. He's a really great guy, but he's been struggling a little bit. He's got some tough draws lately. He's went up against some really quality opponents. But right now, Ohio State's just a complete mystery at 157 for sure, because we haven't seen Jake Ryan for a while. He's been out with an apparent injury, as far as I know, and right now they're leaning on Josh Powell to come in, and right now he's 1-5 on the season, so I'm not really sure how that's going to work out against 2 quality teams coming up, and Nebraska, and then Minnesota's right after, who's also ranked in the top 15. It's just Big Ten wrestling, I guess you could say. Yeah. So Ohio State kind of needs these wins in terms to keep their ranking up for the rest of the season, but this is not going to be an easy test for them.
So they got a couple more duels before Big Tens and then Nationals after that. But it seems like they do have a few injury issues. We saw Jose Rodriguez, he didn't wrestle. They forfeited 125, which I always enjoy because that is a bold move. They were one match away from either winning or losing. Of course, they had Nathan Tomasello.
You can put faith in him to come away with the win.
You can put faith in that. But then they also have Bo Jordan, who hasn't wrestled. I think he did wrestle against Iowa, but he re-aggravated his foot. How worried are you for the Buckeyes about those injuries, especially since they are two people who are ranked and Ohio State's going to have to rely on in the Big Tens?
Well, Tom Ryan talks about all the time, we want to be healthy and we want to improve. That's the two things that you really want in every season while you're winding down. And right now, Ohio State's going to have a bit of a problem with that probably because, Bo Jordan's been out for multiple weeks now, and we don't even know what his status is going to be moving ahead against Nebraska and Minnesota. And if he's not in there, that's going to be a tough go for whoever comes in to replace him. It's probably going to be Justin Kresovic, I would imagine, would be the guy who would go in his place. And Kresovic's a good guy. He's a redshirt senior. He's wrestled pretty well this season. I think he's 8-5 so far, but he's not the same kind of wrestler as Bo Jordan is. We know that. So Ohio State injury-wise, they have to have Rodriguez healthy when they go into the Big Tens. They have to have Jordan healthy. So I think those guys, they might see them sit depending on what weight they start on against Nebraska. And, if it's kind of a match, for instance, they felt confident enough with Tomasello that they said, you know what, we can give up this match against Rutgers, and I think Tomasello will be okay. We can get a team win. And they were. And so I think that's why they sat Rodriguez, make sure he's healthy. I'm sure he'll go against Nebraska. But Jordan, keep your eye on that. That could be that could really hurt them down the road.
After that Rutgers match, the head coach Tom Ryan, he seemed to imply that there was a chance that Bo Jordan could come back against Nebraska. I think a lot of people are skeptical. He's implied that He's implied that before. But this is going to be a big match for the team in that this is another top 5 opponent. You can't lose 3 matches out of 4. That just, although they're all great teams, it's not an awesome look. And then you're moving, but then at the same time you don't want to risk it. So let's talk a little bit about the Nebraska match. There's a chance that will Kyle Snyder wrestle, yes or no?
Well, we don't really know yet at this point because the whole thing with that Iran deal where he was trying to go over to Iran and wrestle for the World Cup with Logan Stieber. That whole fiasco, and now they're finally allowed to go back. And right now he's listed on the roster as it's either him or Josh Fox is going to go for Ohio State. And whenever you see that aura as a wrestling fan, it's just it's a question mark. No one knows who's actually going to go. You probably get a generally good idea. I know Ryan would love to have him in the lineup. Who wouldn't love to have the gold medalist coming back? But, I kind of am leaning towards he might be there for at least one of them, but I don't think he'll be there for both.
And he's not the only person on the roster. Like we've mentioned, they've had injury issues. So who on Ohio State is going to have to perform above their level against Nebraska for Ohio State to get that W?
I think it's going to have to be Cody Bircher. I think he's going to have to come out and really show off and really have a really good match.
And if I'm correct, that's the only match that has 2 unranked opponents in it.
I'm fairly certain, yeah. And, he's a guy who he came into Ohio State. He was recruited. I don't know if he was necessarily recruited for Ohio State, but he came here to wrestle, and he's looked pretty good. Occasionally we saw against Rutgers that the coaches seemed a little aggravated at him near the end of the match. He kind of seemed to. Yeah. They both the guys seemed to lose gas there at the end. But Bircher, he's shown instances where he can be a fantastic wrestler, and then there's occasionally some of those times where I think Ryan calls it, you just have a gap. You just have a mental gap and you're not thinking. And he'll make a mistake, and that can really hurt you in a sport like where everything happens instantaneously almost. So Bircher is going to be one of those guys to watch who, if he has a big performance, I think this Ohio State benefits an incredible amount if Bircher has a great match.
And one of the other guys that I know we were talking about prior to the show is Miles Martin, who's had a very tough go of it lately. He's wrestled a ton of tough guys, and he has another one against Nebraska. What have you seen from him that you've liked lately? And wow, what kind of road has he taken to get here after winning the national championship last year?
Well, Martin last year kind of picked up steam right before the national championships.
Which would be now.
Yeah, well, when I mean right before, I mean literally right before. I think coming into the national championships, he was not expected to have the kind of performance that he did. I mean, he was a true freshman. Who was expecting that from him anyway? I think this year it's kind of similar to last. He had a lull a little bit near the end, and he kind of looked iffy, I guess you could say. Right now, I think he's fine. I think he's still figuring out. It's been tough opponents. He had a great rebound match during Rutgers. He looked very, very solid. Even got some great back points on a great move. And I think he'll be okay. Against Nebraska, that's going to be really tough for him.
Yep. It seems to be the theme with pretty much everyone that he wrestles, especially lately. I know he mentioned it after Rutgers. He was saying he knew it would be tough, And it has proven to be exactly that. And I know his coach Tom Ryan was very proud of him that day.
Well, that's what happens with Big Ten wrestling. We look at the rankings, and it's almost always Big Ten teams in the top 20. I mean, it's always they're always up there.
Yep.
And the later you get in the season, the harder it gets. Like you said, you have to nurse the injuries too. You have to watch that, and that could very well happen against a team like Nebraska. You have to be very careful.
All right, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do, because this is the moment where they need to knock off another one of these top 5 teams. I know they knocked off Missouri earlier this year. It was quite a match, and this is their this is their 4th opportunity to do so, if I'm correct. They haven't been able to get it done in the last 2.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with Penn State. There's no one touching Penn State right now.
Not right now.
I'm not going to say definitively right now that they're going to get the national championship or the Big Ten championship, but my goodness, it's really hard to argue against that. Iowa could easily be a contender, and Ohio State right now is kind of that team that's on the outside looking in for the Big Ten. Nebraska's right behind them, but those guys, they're all just chasing the heels of Penn State and Iowa right now, and even Oklahoma State, who's up there too.
Yep, they're right there. All right, thank you, Nick. We'll see how much more wrestling talk we do in the future, but I know we're both hopeful, especially you after you covered nationals last year. I know that you're hopeful to do so, so thank you for joining us, and maybe Jacob will join us next time too. We'll see you next time.